Welcome to The Link Online. And once again, if you're watching us on Facebook, you'll see some images of Canada. We have lovely buildings and waters and animals and farms and giant landscapes and skyscraper cities. And soon you'll see our smiling faces here in the studio. Oh, there's the flag. Isn't that wonderful? We should salute the flag. Notice, this is the old way. When you were watching DDay, the ceremonies, see the old vets were doing it this way,
yes,
which was the open hand way that they would salute, the Commonwealth forces would salute in the Second World War. Now everybody does it this way.
Oh,
anyway, so there's a little
yeah.
factoid for you, you know. And the interesting thing is, back in the day, the military, the infantry and army and air force would salute this way. But the Navy would salute this way. And that comes from an old tradition whereby the sailors in the Royal Navy, because they're dealing with tarred ropes and so on, would have dirty hands. And so they didn't want to show the dirty hand to the officers and the Queen and so on and so forth. So they would salute this way. There you go. The things you learn on this show. My goodness gracious. Anyway, welcome to the program. We are here once again with the regular team. We have Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi, everybody.
Big round of applause. Levon Swuntz.
Hello.
And Lynn Desjardins.
Hi.
And in the control booth, wondering what we're doing most of the time, we have, of course, today with us Carl Boulanger and Benoit Durand and the ever mysterious Pierre the Pirate Dutil.
Pirate?
Yeah, because he's got that pirate beard today. All right, we have an interesting show as usual. Levon, what do you have for us today?
Well, the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls released its report on Monday, and it accuses Canada of acts of genocide against its Indigenous population, and we'll hear what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had to say about it.
Okay, Lynn, what about you?
Well, I'll talk about the scourge of single-use plastics for packaging food and what Canadians think about it.
And I'll be talking about the D-Day 75th ceremonies from Juno Beach, where the Canadians landed 75 years ago, June the 6th, 1944. I've been following that during the week, and I'll have a little bit of a comment from someone who was there in attendance. So that's coming up on the program today. I'd just like to say hello as well to listeners in France on World Radio Paris and on the shortwave service from Germany and Kauri 97.5 FM Radio Nigeria. So hello to all you guys. Oh, we're out of focus.
Oh, dear.
What happened there?
Gee, I thought it was me.
That's coming up on this edition of The Link Online. All right, we're going to start out with a serious story here in Canada, and that is the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and they presented their final report on Monday. And Levon, that report was 1,200 words or pages? Pages, yeah. I thought so, because it was a big, big, heavy report that they gave. And there's one word that caused quite a bit of controversy there.
Absolutely, and that word was the G word, the genocide. The inquiry was called by the Liberal government more than 3 years ago to shed light on this ongoing tragedy of Indigenous women and girls basically being murdered and disappearing, leaving their communities never to be seen again, and police seemingly not doing much about it. And the inquiry conducted dozens of community meetings, heard some really gut-wrenching testimony from almost 2,000 Canadians. These were testimonies by the surviving family members of the disaffected communities, and the inquiry couldn't get an accurate number of how many women have gone missing or have been murdered since 1980s. The estimates range from anywhere from over 1,200 to up to 4,000 people. That tells you how much of a problem is there to even tracking this problem. The inquiry found that Indigenous women and girls were 12 times more likely to be murdered or to go missing than members of any other demographic group in Canada, and 16 times more likely to be slain or to disappear than white women. This is how the inquiry chief commissioner, Marian Buller, described the root cause of these murders and disappearances.
The significant, persistent, and deliberate pattern of systemic racial and gendered human and Indigenous rights violations and abuses, perpetuated historically and maintained today by the Canadian state, designed to displace Indigenous people from their lands, social structures, and governance, and to eradicate their existence as nations, communities, families, and individuals, is the cause of the disappearances, murders, and violence experienced by Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA people, and this is genocide. This colonialism, this discrimination, and this genocide explains the high rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA people. An absolute paradigm shift is required to dismantle colonialism in Canadian society. And this paradigm shift must come from all levels of government and public institutions. Ideologies and instruments of colonialism, racism, and misogyny, both past and present, must be rejected.
And that was an excerpt of the presentation made by the Chief Commissioner of the inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, Marian Buller. Prime Minister Trudeau was, of course, took the stage sometime later in that same ceremony, and everybody was expecting him to address this. He didn't on Monday.
He addressed the word of genocide.
Yes.
The genocide.
He accepted and he thanked the commission, he accepted the report, but he didn't use the word genocide on Monday. Then on Tuesday, during a press conference in Vancouver, he was asked about the use of the word genocide point blank by several reporters. Let's listen to one of the exchanges he had with one of the reporters in Vancouver on Tuesday.
Tansei, and good morning, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Tina House with the Aboriginal People's Television Network. You cited in the final conclusion of the report yesterday on the Murdered and Missing Women National Inquiry that it was genocide. Do you believe that it was genocide, Mr. Prime Minister?
I think one of the challenges we face right now is a lot of people are engaging in debate over words. As I've said, we accept the findings of the commissioners that it was genocide. But our focus is going to be, as it must be, on the families, on the communities that have suffered such loss, on the systems that have repeatedly failed Indigenous women and girls across this country. Our focus is on bringing together people to solve this challenge, and that's what we will remain focused on.
Yesterday, many of the families that we spoke with said that it was important for them to hear the acknowledgement coming from you. Is that a yes or no? Do you believe it was genocide?
I have acknowledged that I accept the findings of the report. And the issue that we have is that people are getting wrapped up in debates over a very important and powerful term. And our focus, as I said, we accept those findings. We accept the finding that this was genocide. And we will move forward to end this ongoing national tragedy.
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responding to questions from journalists on Tuesday. Not everyone in Canada, however, agrees with the use of the word genocide in this context. Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire was the commander of the UN troops in Rwanda in 1994 when the genocide began. And he says that he has a problem with the use of using the word genocide to describe the Indigenous experience in Canada.
When I hear the term genocide for what has been happening, it's to me, it's certainly raising the attention of people by using the term. However, my definition of genocide, I read it very, very deliberately at the start of the Rwandan genocide. And it was a deliberate act of a government to exterminate deliberately and by force and directly an ethnicity or a group or an entity of human beings. And that meant actual going and slaughtering people and making them martyrs and making them suffer, let alone just kill them. And that's how I saw the genocide. What has been done with the abandonment of the Aboriginal people, and particularly the women in this country, is that a genocide? I got a real problem in trying to put the two together, because the depth of our lack of responding to their needs is scandalous, nothing less. And unless we hold governments to this scandal, then you won't get a solution to it. So is the scandal the genocide? I'm having a problem with it.
And that was retired Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire, former Canadian senator. Apologize for the quality of the sound. He was being interviewed, I think, as he was being ready to fly to Normandy to participate in the DDay celebrations there. So there's a lot of ambient noise there. But as you can see, this debate is not going anywhere. There's several editorials in major newspapers, genocide scholars weighing into this, and so it's going to continue, and we'll see whether the Canadian society comes to some kind of an understanding or a consensus on how to describe these events.
A lot of people have said, for example, that by adopting this word, it will affect how Canada can criticize other nations in the future, because if Canada says, you're committing genocide, they'll say, well, what about you? You've accepted that you've committed genocide. So.
Yeah, Canada officially, I think, accepts the genocide, the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, the Holodomor, the Ukrainian famine, am I missing something?
Rwanda, maybe?
A Rwandan genocide.
Which
yes,
General Dallaire was witnessed.
And there was also a motion in Parliament to recognize the genocide against the Yazidis in Iraq by the Islamic State, the so-called Caliphate.
And I guess we didn't officially recognize the Rohingya.
The Rohingya, no, we haven't
Myanmar.
officially recognized yet, but we also, I think, recognized the events in the Balkans as genocide.
Yes.
All right, there's more coming up. We're going to be talking about D-Day 75 years later in just a moment. Well, the major international news event this week was the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings in World War II on the Normandy coast, which led eventually to the defeat of Nazi Germany and the freedom of Europe. Canada was assigned the center of the invasion along a several-kilometer stretch at a place designated at the time as Juno Beach, and they had the British to the north and the Americans to the south. Surprisingly, perhaps, several Canadian veterans, all in their mid to late 90s, were able to make the overseas trip to be there at the same beach where they stormed ashore amid heavy defensive gunfire and defeated the coastal defenses and were able to move inland to begin the liberation. Now, I've been speaking with a group of soldiers touring the battlefields and who attended the moving ceremony during the June 6th event held at Juno Beach. And yesterday I spoke with Major Richard Gratton, who himself experienced war in the war in Afghanistan, and I asked him first his thoughts about the ceremony.
I was privileged. I was very close to the vets, and as they came down that pathway, that was probably the highlight of the day and the most important part of the day. Just seeing these fine gentlemen that are all in the upper 90s being recognized and also acclaim like almost rock stars because everybody stood up and started applauding them. And you even saw some of them had a bit of tears and emotions in their eyes as they were coming down.
Well, I imagine it was an emotional day for everybody. What was it like for you then?
Me, basically reflecting on the service and sacrifice. With our artillery group, we had a chance to do the battlefields of the First World War and the Second World War. And when you start looking at these tombstones and looking at the age of our forefathers that fought and never came back, and you're looking at 18, 19, 20, and the big quantities, and you're saying, gee whiz, they made the ultimate sacrifice for us to have the Canada that we have. I was reflecting also on, as I'm an Afghan vet, I was reflecting also on my tour where we lost 4 on a roto.
What is that like then to know that some of your comrades are no longer with you because of actions like this?
We train and we go there to do a job. And we all know that there's a risk. And listen, big guys cry, and I've cried at those RAM ceremonies in Afghanistan. I've reflected on the sacrifice in order to serve our country, but also one another. You know, we're all there as a team, and we're all looking for one another. And we know that there's sometimes a price to be paid, but that's the path that we chose, and that's how we decided to serve Canada.
Well, Major Gratton, you've been on this tour with your small group, and you've seen many of these battle sites and so on. What are you going to be taking back with you to Canada from this event?
Basically, I like to take photography, and I like to do those type of presentations, and I've had a chance, and I will still do it, to go and share my experience with some of the high school students in my community. I've had a privilege to do a few of those presentations. And there's one that I've done, which is basically, I start my PowerPoint or my presentation and show them images of tombstones, but I just showed them the age, and like 19, 20, 21, and so on. And after that, I zoom out with the pictures, and I start seeing 1 tombstone, 2 tombstones, and after that, a full row, 2 rows, 3 rows. And you just look at the students there, and they start gasping at the amount and the quantity, and it makes you reflect that we all have a cause in life, and we have to ensure that we represent values as we have in our country and what our armed forces are all about in order to maintain peace. And if we have to fight, we'll fight, but we'll fight for certain causes and principles.
And that was Major Richard Gratton of Montreal. And for more on the event, I've been covering this for the past week. There are several D-Day stories. If you want to go to our website, the highlights section, and look there, you'll find out lots more information and photographs and everything else. And it's interesting because he goes back and he talks to students and he shows them slides and stuff, because that's his hobby and he likes to do that. But it's just surprising how little Canadian youth know about our participation in the war, our history in general, for that matter. I mean, when you think about it, in World War II, going into the war in 1939, the entire population of Canada was just 11 million. And during the war, there were 1.1 million Canadians in uniform. So you think, oh, that's like 1/11 of the population. But then you have to take, I said, wait a minute, half the population is too old and too young. So that number of potential soldiers is reduced to roughly, let's say 6 million. But then you say, well, wait a minute, half of that 6 million were women. And although women were certainly in the war, they weren't obviously in such great numbers as the men. So you have to take out another, maybe a couple of million. So you have 1.1 million people in uniform out of a potential resource of maybe 4 million people. So that's like 1 in 4 Canadian men were in uniform in World War II serving. So that's an incredible number of people. And of course, we had so much contribution in terms of materiel as well. We were making guns and more torpedo boats and airplanes and tanks and trucks and so on. We all contributed this stuff to the war, and yet very few people know that. If you listen to history reports, they'll talk about the Americans and the British, but they don't talk about the Canadians, even though we were very, very much a major contributor to the victory in the war through all kinds of different ways, not the least of which was the fact that we stormed ashore on Juno Beach and took our objectives and helped work our way through Europe to liberate it.
Didn't Canada end the war with the 4th largest navy in the world? Or
Well, yes, indeed, that's true. And the something like the third largest air force or something because of all the planes that we had and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, that's why Canada was given a seat at the peace negotiations and so on, and both in the First World War and the Second World War. We were huge
contributors. Yeah.
Anyway, there's lots more on the website if you want to find out about that. We're going to find out about a current day situation, a real problem, and that is plastic pollution, coming up in just a moment. All right, plastic pollution, a big problem. We've been hearing more and more about it around the world. But now we've got a little bit about what Canadians are actually thinking about this issue and this problem. Lynn?
Well, researchers at Dalhousie University in Eastern Canada focused on plastics which are used one time only for packaging food. Now, these are used extensively. They're particularly difficult to recycle, and most of them end up being either burned or put in landfill. A very small amount of it is actually recycled. The researchers wanted to find out what Canadians thought about the problem and what they were willing to do. I spoke to a co-author of the report about the results, and I began by asking Professor Tony Walker why there was such an explosion in the use of this one-time plastic food wrapping.
And we're likely to hear that at any particular
It was very interesting. I hope we get to hear him. Basically, what he was saying was that the vast majority of they did a survey, an online survey, and they found that the vast majority of Canadians, some 97%, really were very concerned about this one-time use plastic packaging for food. They wanted something done about it. However, we're a little more reluctant to spend a lot of money to take care of the problem. They're only willing to say an added 2.7% to the cost of their food in order to take care of the problem. I also asked him, why? Because I know in my lifetime we started with, paper and so on. There was not nearly as much of the plastic wrapping that we see now. And apparently it was brought in for two reasons. One, for food safety, to make sure that the food was not contaminated. And second of all, to keep it fresher and to increase the shelf life of the food product. So, if you've got your cucumber and you wrap it up in plastic, it's not going to dry out so much. It'll last longer. So it was good in terms of food waste and food security. But what he said...
Well, we're going to hear him now because we've located...
I should stop. Okay, go for it.
The primary reason was to maintain food safety so that food wouldn't spoil and we don't get sick. So we've benefited from that for many decades now without us even knowing about it. Another reason why plastics is used by and large is to extend the shelf life of food. So, of course, that avoids food waste. So both of those two primary reasons are very important, and the Canadian food sector has benefited from that, as have Canadians. However, what we've seen in recent decades is perhaps the overuse of plastics, many different plastic types, and what it means now is we produce so much waste, and a lot of that is, unfortunately, is not recycled.
So what did you find out about people's attitudes?
Yeah, well, it was overwhelming. So we found that 93.7% of Canadians, that's most Canadians, do not want single-use plastics, although we're highly motivated to reduce plastic packaging in food. And so that is very convincing, and that's a very dramatic piece of data from this study. However, what we did find, whilst most Canadians want to reduce their environmental impact, they're not prepared to pay too much more for the comparable green alternatives. And what we found is that Canadians don't want to pay more than 2.5% price increase for a green alternative.
So based on that, what do you recommend?
First and foremost, I think the food industry needs to align their policies related to food safety, because that's really important and paramount, but they need to make sure that they're producing packaging that closely aligns with environmental regulations. So, for example, most municipalities or regions across Canada can only handle certain types of plastics in their waste recycling stream, and all of the others, unfortunately, go to landfill or worse, possibly enter the environment. so, we need to make sure that they harmonize and streamline the types of plastics that are still currently used. And then the other recommendation is to come up with research and development into alternatives to plastic packaging. And so that could be plant-based polymers. And again, the same rules apply. If you're going to come up with alternatives that aren't necessarily plastic, we need to make sure that we can deal with them in the waste stream. So those regulations need to speak to each other. And also another recommendation is we have more biodegradable, compostable options. And compostable, making sure that they contain more plant-based products without the use of petroleum products.
So Professor Tony Walker notes that some food chains are allowing shoppers to bring in their own clean containers, but that means people have to remember to bring them to the store. And if they are less than clean, there could be problems of contamination. So that's something that they're looking at. Another major supermarket chain is partnering with a company to provide reusable containers. And they would take it back, clean them, and then return them to the store for reuse. So these are options that are being studied now. So it looks like there are changes coming slowly but surely.
All right. Now, we just have a few minutes remaining. So, Marie-Claude, you're going to be talking about your fishing experience once again. But
Well, actually, yeah, I'm going to publish something this weekend about it. But today I wanted to bring your attention to a website that offers a map to locate icebergs along the coast of Newfoundland.
because this
and
is
Labrador.
iceberg season.
Exactly. Like Lynn, a few weeks ago, you wrote something about that in that area.
It's a booming season
Yeah,
for
exactly.
icebergs.
There's like twice as much as usual icebergs along that. So we call that Iceberg Alley. It's so basically there's icebergs drifting from Greenland to the middle of the Atlantic somewhere. So yeah. So if you want to go between April and August to Newfoundland, Labrador, well, then this is what you can see. So this is the map. It's going to show you the website. Right now, there's 294 icebergs drifting by the coast. So if we explore the iceberg map, here it is. So that's, zoomed in. But if you click on one of those icebergs, like Pierre will do, here we go. So he clicked on one and it gives you the size and where you can see it and stuff. And so basically, if you're planning a trip there, of course, there's amazing pictures also on the website. But what I'm going to show you now is a video made by Newfoundland and Labrador Tourism Agency and show you how beautiful it is. So here we go.
Okay.
So that's what you can see from off the shore of Newfoundland.
That's Canada's Atlantic coast, of course. There's rugged territory, so it's a great place to visit. But if you're at this time of year, you get the bonus of seeing these icebergs.
Yeah, I think the by the end of June, there's less and less of them. I was there in July, and we didn't see any of them. But I think if you go, April, May, or
How did you go? Do you get close to them on boats, or you
can get close, but it says on the map whether you can see them from a distance from the land, or if you need to go on boat.
There are a lot of tour companies that hire out dinghies, and you can just get into a dinghy and you can't get too close, obviously, because there's always a danger that they hive or that they turn upside down even, which can cause a big wake and overturn your boat. But oftentimes you can see them right from the shore. This year there were very strong winds that were blowing them in closer to shore. Yeah, there you see a boat fairly close. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, and they make a beer called Iceberg beer in Newfoundland.
Out of the water.
It's so good. Very refreshing.
Iceberg vodka too.
Do we have
I
time
was
to
going to say that's right. It's even called iceberg vodka, right?
Yeah, there is.
So you can get these products made out of ice that was probably what they say like 10,000 years old or something like that. Well, on that cheery note, iceberg vodka or beer.
It's Friday.
It's Friday, and of course you can see the show Saturday and Sunday on Facebook. The reprise, the replay of it, of course. Well, that's all the time we have today. So for Marie-Claude, Lavonne, Lynn, myself, and Pierre, the mysterious Dutil, and Carl Boulanger and Benoit Durand in the control room. Take care. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.